Next presenter, please come forward, Mr. Tom Adams. Welcome, Mr. Adams. You've seen the drill. 5 minutes opening address now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Current law, as reflected in Section 7916 of the OEB Act, Ontario Regulation 95.5, and as articulated in the OEB Standard Supply Service Code, the RPP Manual, and the Retail Settlement Code, all require the regulated price plan rates to recover full costs as reflected in HOEP and GA. Despite all that, the existing RPP rate effective May 1st recovers less than full cost. The current RPP rate is illegal. Minister Thibeault's reaction, he praises the OEB for breaking the law, implementing an under-recovering RPP rate, quote, in anticipation of our legislation. Scofflaw behavior from the minister is not new. The OEB has operated in violation of key governance requirements of the legislation, either sections 4.2 or 5 or both, since July of 2010. All of this law breaking has been directly supervised by every successive minister, starting with Brad Dogood. This government repeats its public statements that the Ontario Energy Board is an independent protector of consumers, while behind the scenes the government destroys the foundation of sound public utility regulation. Notice that no public ministerial directive to the OEB has been issued on the illegal RPP. What was the secret communication between Minister Thibeault and the OEB that resulted in the current illegal RPP? After Bill 132 passes, the current RPP will be legal, but the OEB will perform no legitimate function with respect to electricity commodity rates. Rates will be whatever the minister wishes, with the OEB nothing but a cutout to shield government from criticism. Bill 132 is premised on the claim that global adjustment is being refinanced. This claim is inaccurate and misleading, both with respect to its reference to GA and the so-called refinancing. The entire rate is being gamed, not just GA, and the nature of that gaming is to use a deferral account, not contract refinancing. The cost deferral effect of Bill 132 will create a financial snowplow, pushing today's costs onto future generations. Once OPG's purpose was to operate efficiently and the IESO was to act as a market facilitator. These historic purposes were all intended to serve consumers. Under Bill 132, the new prime directive of these two agencies is to facilitate continuity of the ruling party. Given the government's intention to defer costs, why not use the government's existing electricity bank, Ontario Electricity Financial Corporation? Why graft a new head onto OPG? The answer is obvious. This government seeks to muddy the already murky financial waters of Ontario's power situation. Bill 132's improper purpose is to make the insolvency of OEFC less obvious. I plead again, as I have many times in committee, for the Auditor General to pay closer attention to OEFC and its dependence on the credit quality of the fundamentally insolvent OPG. To the Liberal members of this committee, I urge you to recall the speeches of the former Energy Minister Dwight Duncan from April of 2004, when he articulated your policy that consumers must pay the full cost of electricity. I invite you to consider how the word fair in the title of Bill 132 will appear from the perspective of ratepayers right after the next election, when your financial snowplow ends and rates soar. The government's claim that this cost deferral legislation is justified because newly contracted generation will provide consumers with value after the current 20-year contracts expires is not a supportable argument. When their existing FIT contracts expire, the value of most of the new renewable generation facilities, particularly the wind generation, will be as worthless as that wind power is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. To begin with the NDP, Mr. Tabbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Adams. Nice to have you here this morning, as always. You made comments about the Ontario Energy Board not being an independent regulator. And as you're well aware, the Liberals have said time and time again that the sell-off of Hydro One is fine because we have an independent regulator who will be there looking out for the customers. Can you enlarge on why you don't see the OEB as an independent regulator?
Starting in July of 2010, the requirement of the Energy Board legislation, which establishes a management committee for the board, that requires 2 vice chairs and a chair to populate that management committee. Those requirements were not observed by the government in its appointments process. And starting from that time forward, the OEB has not functioned in compliance with the legislation. If the Energy Board was an independent agency to protect, to balance the interests of consumers versus producers, as the government repeatedly claims in its public comments, it would be a legally constituted body. It would be complying with the Energy Board legislation in all its respects. I am personally familiar with many of the members of the Ontario Energy Board. I've practiced with them in submissions at the Energy Board for 2 decades in some cases. These are not people that would support violating their own mandating legislation. They're only doing it because they're pushed.
Can you speak more about how this refinancing, quote unquote, is not real in this bill?
The use of the term refinancing is improper. What's being done here is the creation of a deferral account. In jurisdictions that respect proper process with respect to public utility regulation, deferral accounts are recognized to be regulatory band-aids, very limited instruments suitable only for short-term time shifting of recovery of cost. In, for example, a situation where you have a capital project that isn't in the rate base, the in-service date has been delayed for some reason, and a deferral account is set aside in order so those costs can be taken care of at the appropriate time, when the better knowledge is in place. What's done here is the creation of a deferral account for a vast portion of the revenue requirement of the entire power system. That is not a proper purpose. That's not refinancing. That's a deferral account, but an improper purpose.
And I had seen this move of the debt over to Ontario Power Generation as a way of getting the debt off the government's books as opposed to being with the OIFC.
Thank you, Mr. Tabbins. The government side, Mr. Delaney.
Mr. Adams, the Fair Hydro Plan proposes to provide fast and very substantial relief to Ontario's taxpayers. Is this a priority in Ontario?
I'm sorry, perhaps you misstated, but it's not relief for taxpayers, right?
Ratepayers.
Ratepayers. It is a proper purpose to provide relief for ratepayers.
Thank you. You repeatedly alleged that the province is breaking a law. Which law?
The Ontario Energy Board Act and its supporting regulations require that the RPP reflect the combined expected cost of HOEP and GA, and that's not what is in the current RPP.
Thank you, Chair. Those are our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. To the PC side, Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. Can you just expand, my colleague from the NDP was talking about the transfer of debt on the OPG books. Can you tell us what you believe that truly is?
Yeah. When the government was coming up with its plan to defer electricity costs, they had the option of using an existing electricity agency, Ontario Electricity Finance Corporation. That corporation is audited by the provincial auditor. I have complained for many years about the audit that has been done, but at least it gets audit attention directly by the Auditor General. At some point in the future, the Auditor General will turn their attention to this important subject in a more deliberate way than has been done historically, and I believe that OEFC's financial problems will become much more clear at that time.
Can I also just ask an interjection of, is it truly moving it off the government's books and putting it onto the OPG books so the government can say they balance the budget? Was that in your belief true?
They may have had that intention, but if there is a proper audit of OEFC reflecting the financial dependence of OEFC on Ontario power generation, then the fact that OPG has accumulated this new deferral account and this new stranded hydro debt will not shield the government at all from a proper audit and the deficit implications that come with it.
Correct. And you've used the term deferral, which I agree with. We're just moving the shells back, and a future generation is going to actually, but there is going to be real financial impact to generations down the road. I mean, do you believe that there was a better way of dealing with the 28 or 43 potentially $billion debt that they're going to accumulate by moving the yardstick?
It's not proper to take a large portion of the deferral account and simply shove it off into a deferral account. This is not a re-amortization. This is like taking out every month a payday loan to cover a portion of your rent. Okay? If you refinance your house, you own your house. We don't own the, Ontario consumers do not own the power system. We rent it. And if you are taking out a payday loan to cover a chunk of your rent every month, you know you got a problem.
It's not truly giving relief, it's just short-term relief. At the end of the day, again, they increased rates from 200 to 400% depending on where you live. 25% isn't going to cut it.
Well, whether it's 25% or 29% or...
Thank you, Mr. Walker, and thanks to you, Mr. Adams, for your deputation. Our next